you gave me an answer of what Joe Biden said in Western Pennsylvania. What is your belief about what a Biden administration would in fact do vis-a-vis fracking?
Well, I think partly it will depend finally on who we appoint to a few key positions. I think there will be more restrictions. I think there'll be more regulation. Which will not ban fracking, but they've said you can't produce on federal lands, and people hear that, and I think Yellowstone National Park. But the federal government owns 48% of the western United States. There's a lot of land there that's not Yellowstone National Park. So I think there'll be that. And I think it'll be harder to build pipelines for these new supplies. That there'll be more kind of, in general, there'll be a bigger emphasis on regulation across the economy. That's where their pendulum is swinging.
Well, it's pretty scary to me. All right, now, do you have a theory as to why the opponents of fossil fuels are not pro-nuclear power?
Well, there are a few who are, but I think it's part of the DNA to be against nuclear power too, even though it's 20% of our electricity, and it is carbon-free electricity. So, I think it's just been part of the toolkit for so long. Obviously, things like Fukushima, when you have something like that happen.
Yeah, but Fukushima proves how safe it is.
Well, I guess in some ways you can say that. In any event, Fukushima was, in my previous book, I looked into it, and if the seawall had been about 3 feet higher, it probably wouldn't have happened. But in any event, let's say Germany is shutting down its nuclear power. In that same period of time, China will have added more nuclear power. So other countries are moving ahead, but here, it's partly also the other thing right now. Nuclear is having this problem just competing with cheap natural gas. But to go back to your point, I think there are probably some environmentalists, some people very concerned about climate change who want nuclear power, but the vast majority of it just have written it off and
right. So here it's not a right-left issue. I'm just curious, what is there? Is it purely emotional? I have not read a single coherent argument against nuclear power.
Yeah, I think there is it goes back decades. It's this fear of, what you can't see, of radiation and all this sort of scare things. But, nuclear power in the United States is very well managed, and there's a very effective system for managing it.
But the reason, by the way, forgive me, I just want to say the reason I said Fukushima proved its safety is that was the worst case scenario, and virtually no one died.
Yeah, that's true.
People died of the tsunami, not of radiation.
Yeah, and what I was going to add, what's not well known, there are actually in this country now 62, I think, well, certainly over 60 companies and projects looking at developing next generation nuclear energy. So nuclear is, people see that nuclear, if you're going to move in the direction people want to move to low carbon, nuclear is part of that picture.
The book is The New Map. Daniel Yergin,